I keep opening the character menu and getting jump scared by Nilu's portrait. It's like the people with blue eyes meme. Hello. I'm gonna get it out of the way. Dori is a weird character, so this is gonna be a weird video. She's a character that can fill a lot of roles, but filling those roles takes certain 5-star characters or constellations. So I'm going to be doing a lot of bouncing back and forth between teams and her talents and constellations. I'm going to do my best to keep everything cohesive, so let's just start off with her base kit, which is luckily pretty simple. Her normals are useless and you never have to think about leveling them. You'd be a character that lets you save resources. At a baseline, all her skill does is damage. She fires 1 initial shot, which turns into 2 smaller shots, 3 if you have C1. Added together, the skill has an okay multiplier, but as we're going to get into, you pretty rarely build Dori for her attack scalings, so this is probably another talent that you can skip leveling. The initial shot and the follow-up rounds share an ICD with each other, that ICD being standard. So at C0, this will only get you 1 reaction, but at C1, adding 1 more shot, you'll get a second, which that is far more Dori's thing than attack scaling talent damage. She is incredible at applying Electro, and that is exemplified in her burst. She throws out this little lamp, and characters connected to it get healed, but also get some small energy restoration. Yeah, emphasis on the small. It scales with talent level, but goes up to 2.5 energy per tick. This ticks for a total of 6 times. That's a total of 15 energy. That energy only goes to your onfielder. This can be very, very impactful on units with lower burst costs, but it's not something that I find myself relying on or even necessarily thinking about that much when I play Dori. In any case, it certainly doesn't solve her energy needs. She has a ridiculous 80 cost and the associated 20-second cooldown. However, I found that the cost is often not a problem with Dori. She has a lot of ways to generate energy. It's more often that I find the 20-second cooldown, or more specifically, the massive 8 seconds of downtime that hold Dori back. In fact, if we look at both of her Ascension passives, we can realize that they're both concerned with generating extra energy. Her Ascension 1 passive reduces the cooldown of her skill when characters affected by her burst trigger reactions, which, you know, more skill cast means more energy, and her Ascension 4 passive is just straight up flat energy generation. At base, it is just 5, but unlike other sources of flat energy, this one actually scales with her energy recharge. It maxes out at 15, which is 300 energy recharge, which is more than you will ever need. Nothing crazy, just free energy. This amount of energy can really begin to add up, especially if you can find ways to cast her skill multiple times. You know, like the one that exists in her kit that we just talked about. Anyways, I seem to have gotten distracted, because I said that Dori's niche was reaction spam, and I have yet to mention why any of this matters in reaction spam. Cool, she gives herself a lot of energy. She can use a skill that gets 2 reactions once every 8 or 9 seconds. Big whoop. Her burst ticks once every 2 seconds. How is that at all useful in reaction spam? Well, as it turns out, dear viewer, I've been deceiving you. The healing and energy generation on her burst have a tick rate of 2 seconds, but the damage doesn't. On the contrary, the damage ticks extremely quickly. Now, you'll notice that while the damage ticks pretty fast, the application does not. And that's true, it has a special ICD of once every 3 seconds. But you know what reaction ICDs don't apply to? That one. I'm gonna hold off on talking about Dori Hyperbloom until a little bit later, because that is an archetype that scales really well with constellations on Dori, and specific weapons and specific units. So while we're still only talking about, you know, the simplest stuff, the most recent gear, the base kit, I'm gonna hold off about talking Hyperbloom just yet, because she's not the best Hyperbloom trigger at this level of investment. As I went over, she has a lot of downtime, she doesn't really have a ton of quality of life to make up for it. The only Hyperbloom I would bother playing with a lower investment Dori is I guess I have to mention this right away. We have the absolute banger team that is Lanyan Hyperbloom. So, alright, I'm gonna admit it. I have lied to you again. All in such a short time span. I'm so sorry that I've had to do this to you. Dori's Burst has one last, very unique property that I've failed to mention. As far as I'm aware, Dori is the only character in the game who can apply Electro to other characters, and you can use that to enable things like Lanyan. If she has an Electro Aura, she will absorb Electro with her skill and do Electro damage. This isn't just true of Lanyan. I believe Kazuha can do this. Sayu is another fairly strong option. Essentially, the idea is you are making up for Dori's lost uptime by using the Electro that she applies to another unit to make them your temporary bloom trigger. It's more taking advantage of a fun interaction than it is a really, really good team, but it's solid enough to clear Abyss level content pretty consistently. I might talk about it a little bit more later when I talk about Hyperbloom a little bit more, but yeah, this is a thing that you can do. Now let's get back to base kit Dori. This is the scenario. All you have is your C0 Dori, no special weapon of any sort. You weren't even playing for the last version, so you didn't get Flameforge Insight. Let's just throw Earthshaker, level 1 Earthshaker on her. What can you do with this Dori? Well, I'm gonna be honest with you, not very much. C0 Dori is frankly just not a very great unit. She has a lot of downsides, and in my opinion, she doesn't bring enough to a team to justify those downsides. She rotates slow, she's clunky, she has a lot of downtime, and what do you get in return? Okay-ish Electro application that can only really be used for Hyperbloom, and then decent single target healing and some energy refund. Yeah, no thanks, I'm probably just gonna use Kuki. But if you really just like Dori and you want to use her that much, pretty much the only team I would consider running her in is lunar-charged, and not lunar-charged with Inefa. Lunar-charged with Flynn's if you don't have Inefa. Dori has a pretty hard time providing anything to Inefa teams. Her application is just kind of slow and not very useful, and her healing is also made a lot less relevant by Inefa having a shield. But on the flip side, if you don't have an Inefa, finding a defensive option in Flynn's teams can actually be kind of rough. He ideally wants a second Electro so he can get that Electro resonance and get a lot of extra particle generation. He is a character who gets his damage through energy. And for Electro units with defensive value, technically Beidou and Eon-san, but they don't really count. They have more minor defensive value that needs to be combined with other defensive utilities to make it particularly strong. Pretty much the only options are Kuki and Dori. There's barely even a scuffed prototype Amber option. Like, Yai has the literal only 22-second burst cooldown in the game. Lisa's on 20 seconds and she's got some pretty bad energy issues. You know, and honestly, I just remembered Veresa exists, and now you do not understand how badly I want to see prototype Amber support Veresa for Flynn's. But yeah, your defensive options for Flynn's are not that great. Well, actually, I guess you're here, but she's probably going to be a very, very popular option if you don't have an Inefa, isn't she? I would say that these three units are probably your main choices for a defensive slot in Flynn's teams without an Inefa. Out of these three, I would probably say that Dori is the worst. You can only burst with her every other rotation because her cooldown is too long, and her healing isn't even really good enough to make up for it. But she is the only one who is going to be on Flynn's banner, which is really the main reason why I'm bringing this up. I think Dori is going to be a pretty usable budget option in Flynn's teams. Definitely not a long-term solution. You're going to want to look to upgrade even to one of these two, if not an Inefa. But if Dori is all you have access to for the time being, she serves her purpose well enough. When it comes to gear, this is probably the simplest archetype for Dori, because you just want things that can give any supportive value. For artifacts, that might mean Noblesse. You can throw her on Serenade and then Aino on Instructor. Maybe even Song of Days Past. Any one of those three are going to work just fine. Yes, Scroll is a buffing set, but if you're playing her with Flynn's doesn't want damage percent. And then for weapons, she pretty much has the same situation as Aino does. It's Fav or it's Makaira. Her on-field playstyle opens up a lot of different options for her in the weapon category, but as a more traditional budget support option, it's pretty much going to be one of these two. Now let's check out her constellations to talk about some teams that she's actually good in. As I mentioned, C1, you get an additional reaction out of her skill, more reactions, more fun. She's a reaction spam unit. C2, when her burst heals a character, it fires an additional little missile, and it has its own unique ICD, so it gets you more reactions. C3 through 5 are all kind of useless. C3 lets you max out the energy that her burst gives you without having to crown the burst, which I guess is kind of nice, because it maxes out at 2.5 at talent level 10, which you have to use a crown unless you have C3. C4 is kind of just bad conditional buffs. The incoming healing bonus can be kind of useful, mostly in context around Farina, but neither of these are really reliable or strong enough to consider changing your build or gameplay over. And then C5 is only skill damage. I already mentioned you don't care about skill damage. C6 is where basically all the fun is. After using her skill, she gets an infusion for 3 seconds, deals electro damage, and when she hits opponents, she'll do a full party heal for 4% of her HP. This C6 is insane. It gives her a much stronger on-field presence, it gives her a decent source of extra application, and it gives her a strong amount of full party healing, which she pretty sorely lacks at C0. Her burst healing is kind of weak and single target. This constellation changes how Dori plays and unlocks an entire new side to her. Just, to give a little context, I'm getting 12.7% of her max HP as healing to my on-fielder once every 2 seconds. For her skill, now it's not reliable, but you can do some dash cancels on her to get a lot of healing out of just one skill use. By going skill into 2 normal attacks, I canceled it too fast, but dash canceling after your second normal attack and then doing 2 more normal attacks. There we go. You can get 6 infused hits and 6 instances of healing. 4 times 6. That is 24% of her HP to the entire party. Twice of what her burst scaling was. Just one proc of this skill has the potential to heal 8 times as much as her burst. Of course, the situation in which this is most relevant is Farina. Sure, it's good defensive utility, but it is also incredible at building fanfare. Let's go check out byeeeee. With a crowned skill, he's still only healing 14% of his max HP. And granted, he is a 5-star. He has a higher base HP. They both ascend with HP, but his is higher. But those aren't gonna make up for the fact that his scaling is around 40% lower than hers. C6 Dori has the potential to be an incredibly strong healer, and therefore, you don't even have to build her with HP to make her a strong healer, which is what makes her so fantastic with Farina in Dendro teams. You can use her to buff the personal damage of your other units in the team. Not Lauma, but previously it would have been like Nahida. Pretty classic team that I played, and I think a lot of other Dori players also really enjoy, was this one right here, where you split your field time between Technari and Dori. But because she has such strong scaling on her healing, you can build her as a full EM hyperbloom trigger, and she's still gonna heal more than enough for Farina in this team. She makes an incredible combination healer and hyperbloom trigger. And it's kind of weird what Lauma has done for Dori, because at the same time, yeah, a unit that directly buffs Dori's best archetype is good. I'm not gonna complain about Lauma existing and making my Dori way better, but just like what Inefa did for Aoife, Lauma provides a unit that buffs Dori's best archetype by a lot and numerically makes her teams perform a lot better. But because so much of her value comes from dealing and buffing damage that doesn't scale on damage percent, Farina becomes a lot less relevant, and therefore Dori's healing becomes a lot less relevant. Like, don't get me wrong, this is still an incredible team. Lauma and Farina are both incredibly strong units on their own, and you can still play them together and you'll still get a good team, but there's enough asymmetry between them that I think it opens a little bit of a rift and gives Dori 2 main paths for her hyperbloom teams. The more Lauma focused ones and the more Farina Nahida focused ones. The last important thing that C6 does, it makes Dori's downtime so much better. As I mentioned, C0 Dori has horrible downtime, a whole 8 seconds that her burst is shorter than its cooldown. Her C6 giving her a short infusion after using her skill lets her stagger her application and, more importantly, continually trigger hyperblooms for more of the rotation. This constellation makes Dori kind of a powerful unit. Her niche is just that, niche, a quick swap hyperbloom trigger that full party heals. That's not always a useful niche, but it's really cool. I think Dori gets a really interesting kit with C6, and I just kind of wish that she got it sooner. All right. That's a lot. So before I fully dive into the rest of the teams, let's just take a step back and look at Dori's gear. Yeah, small problem. Dori uses a bunch of different gear depending on what team you want to put her in. Very much like Sethos, Dori has multiple different ways you can play her, and her gear very much affects those different ways, with the standout example being Sack Greatsword. Sack Greatsword gets you a second skill, allowing you to double the duration of your infusion from 3 seconds to 6 seconds. That gets you more healings, that could potentially get you more hyperbloom triggers. There's a lot of reasons that you could want to on-field Dori for a longer period of time. Whether you do or don't want to extend Dori's field time basically just comes down to whether there is another unit on the team who can use the field time better. Like in this one here, Llama and Farina aren't really doing anything when given field time, but Tichnari absolutely can deal reasonable burst damage if swapped into. Whereas if we replaced him with Nahida, you might be better off on-fielding Dori for the increased fanfare generation and more bloom triggers. Sack Greatsword is the main weapon that you would want to use for a longer on-field Dori playstyle. Nothing else comes close to doing what Sack does for her, and it has a nice little ER substat on it. So along with all the flat energy that she generates, it pretty much solves her energy needs by itself. Any other weapon that gives a smattering of EM and energy is serviceable, but Sack is more often than not my go-to option for Dori teams. Let's talk about artifacts. Just like weapons, there are sets that give you a nice smattering of just good stats that you can use in Hyperbloom, like Gilded Dreams, like Flop, like Silken Moon's Serenade, and those are all going to be solid options, but they aren't nearly as fun as my go-to option. TF pretty much has the exact same effect that Sack Greatsword does. It reduces her cooldown upon triggering reactions. She triggers a lot of reactions, so she can get more skills, make better use of her field time. With the inherent cooldown reduction that's in her kit, you can actually get some pretty decent uptime with Thundering Fury, especially when you combine it with Sack Sword. Dori can upfield for up to 10 or so seconds if you really need it. So there you go, that's kind of the gist of it. If you're using her as more of an off-fielder, you likely just want to throw an artifact set on her that gives a bunch of EM to herself and or the team. But if you're using her as an on-fielder, which is probably more likely if you're playing her in a Farina team, then Thundering Fury can provide a lot of extra value by extending her on-field presence. And the exact same thing goes for weapons. There are ones that give you a bunch of energy and EM, and that's really nice, and then there's Sack Greatsword. So let's look at the teams! Okay, next day of recording, it's team time. As I've mentioned, this is kind of my idea of like a classic Dori team. Replace Llama with Nahida. I played this team a lot. I've seen a lot of other Dori players talk about it a lot. Let me just do a run to give an example. Oh yeah, I've also started using Key Farina. It's not terribly relevant to the video, because it just makes numbers bigger, but giving Farina a weapon that turns her into an EM buffer makes her a lot more relevant in this team in particular, but really Nodcry teams going forward. So I don't know, if you have Key Farina and that's like a thing you want to use going forward, Dori is good at both enabling her and making use of the EM buff. Since this isn't a long field time team, I'll do Flameforge, but I'll keep on Thundering Fury. Am I only doing that because I'm too lazy to swap artifacts? Maybe. Beautiful. That was a little messy. I could probably do it a little cleaner. Yeah, pretty simple work. Swap into Dori a first time to use her burst, do a skill into a little bit of onfielding and get your healing. Swap to Tiknari, who then uses the fanfare that Dori has built up to do his personal damage. And at the end of the rotation, you go back to Dori and you pick up whatever blooms are laying around. Get some extra hyperblooms. She feels best as a quick swap unit, and this is probably one of the teams where most of her properties come into play. And while this is one of my favorites, this is one that you're probably going to see pretty commonly. This is far from her only option. Tiknari is incredibly replaceable here. He can be replaced with Nahida, he can be replaced with Yai, he can pretty much be replaced with any unit of any of these elements. My only recommendation is that if you use an Electro unit, make sure it's one that doesn't steal too many hyperblooms, because Dori is built for EM here. She is supposed to be the trigger. But someone like Yai or Fischl is a perfect option. In fact, Yai especially because of the longer field time that she takes. Let's try a run of that. Oh, come on. Certainly not as potent as Tiknari, but it's certainly solid. As a unit who can actually, you know, make good use of the field time that she's given, I am a fan of Yai in this slot. And Dori's insane energy generation actually makes it so that Yai Miko can consistently burst. Granted, she's still on that 22-second cooldown. Nothing to be done about that, but that's kind of fun. Nahida's useful here. Well, you could do Kokomi, but you can't really make use of her healing because you already have a full party healer. Yelan, Xingqiu, Kuki, Auron, I guess. Even I know if you're okay with losing the Bloom crit buff that you get from Lauma. Especially since Lauma's come out and made Hyperbloom teams so much better than they were. It's kind of just do whatever you want as long as you get the right application out. If you're generating blooms and a unit with some EM is triggering those blooms, you're kind of set. I mean, as I was going over, Lauma is so powerful to the point where you don't really need Farina anymore. I am using her because she still is a solid slot in this team. As I mentioned, she could be run on Key and then actually have a decent buffing option that benefits the entire team. She's still doing some okay personal damage herself, although her buffs are better used if they're benefiting multiple units, like Tiknari, like Yai. But also, Lauma just has Hydro Res Shred. I mean, it doesn't say it here, it says it here, but she just has Hydro Res Shred, so Farina actually is getting some offensive buffs. Granted, if you don't have her, or if you want to use her in another team that could use her better, then, you know, you can replace her with Yelan or Xingqiu. Really, the only unit that is quote-unquote necessary is Lauma, and even then, Nahida is workable. She's not fantastic, but she is more than serviceable. Lauma is just better. But these teams were more than functional pre-Lauma. I've been getting up to these shenanigans in Abyss for forever. Anyways, yeah, for that reason, it's kind of hard to speak on Hyperbloom because all the teams just kind of perform the same way. Get all the right elements, apply them in the right order, and you're set. And Dori is going to be serviceable in any functional Hyperbloom team. Get your unit that applies Dendro off field, get your unit that applies Hydro off field, you can at least clear floor 11 of Abyss. Now that we're done talking about the regular Hyperbloom teams, let's move on to the weird Hyperbloom teams. Also, yeah, sorry, this entire video is about Hyperbloom. That's kind of all that Dori has. Let's of course run back to my initial mention of Anemo Hyperbloom, where you use Dori's self-Electro application to get an Electro absorption on your Anemo unit and make them into a potential Hyperbloom trigger. The idea was presented to me with Lanyan, but frankly I feel like she's just one of the worst units at doing it. I think the other two units who can reliably get absorptions off of elements being on themselves are just better, those being Kazuha and Sayu, because both of them have long-lasting abilities that absorb. For Sayu, you have her hold skill, which can last up to 10 seconds, but in practice, probably never will go that long. Somewhere more around 4 or 5 second mark, I'd guess. And for Kazuha, it's his burst, which lasts 8 seconds. Lanyan only has the hits of her skill, which, you know, only happens when she uses her skill, once every 12.5 seconds, or twice if you're using her signature weapon. Anyways, Lanyan is probably the worst at doing this, but as I mentioned, she was the one that the idea was presented to me with, and even though she's the worst at it, she's still good enough to clear. This is a competitive team that can be taken through Abyss level content. Is it easy? Hell no. I still am not good at this team. I just want to show you guys what a decent rotation might look like. One shot him, llama. That was not a one shot. That was very, very far from a one shot. I think that first recording was okay enough. I want to try it out with Sayu to see if my hypothesis is correct. Why are you up and beating me up? I'm trying to pull something up on my second monitor. Why are you awake? I actually think maybe I was wrong. I think I like this less. Because with Sayu, it's much harder to hit the Dendrocores because she has such a tiny hitbox when she's in her Roly form. So especially when there's a boss and a Dendrocore spawns under them, it can be kind of hard to hit and trigger a bloom. Maybe Lanyan is the best unit for this. Maybe I'm wrong. That one, I don't know. I feel like I couldn't really tell. Maybe they're right. Maybe Lanyan is the best unit for this slot because Sayu can be kind of hard to hit the bloom cores, and Kazuha might apply too much electro and make it hard to actually generate bloom cores, which is a problem that would be solved if I was playing with Nahida, who has stronger Dendro application in this scenario. But with Llama's application, you might actually need Lanyan in this slot. So maybe I'll shut up forever. Maybe Hyperbloom Lanyan is the best Animo Infuser Hyperbloom trigger. In any case, I think I really only have one team that I want to look at in any sort of depth right now. I've done a lot of silly stuff in the past with Dori. Like this, I've tried to incorporate her into Burn Vape Farina. Things that, I mean, like I've cleared Abyss with this, but it wasn't easy, and it probably wouldn't clear a modern Abyss. My point is that there certainly is a lot of stuff outside of Hyperbloom that you can do with Dori, but frankly, it's just not all that great. Dori's biggest strengths are her massive amounts of application and her role consolidation, her ability to be an Electro unit, a full party healer, an EM trigger, and Hyperbloom teams are what make the best use of that role consolidation, and anything outside of those teams are just not gonna be the best. Teams like this are certainly doable. As I said, I've beaten a few Abyss cycles with this exact team, but Dori was probably a little more detrimental there than I would like to admit. But Dori is certainly functional in slots like these. If you just want to play an on-field Dori and you have a team like this, go crazy. It won't be great, but it'll work. Now that we've gotten that little quick reprieve, let's get right back into Hyperbloom and talk about the team where her role consolidation actually matters the most. That being Shatterbloom, or as I've taken to calling it, hypershat. Not only is Dori a full party healer and defensive unit, not only is she an Electro unit and an EM trigger, she is also a Claymore unit, which of course means that she can trigger the reaction shatter, unfreezing an enemy and dealing physical damage to them. Now, the only reason I didn't mention this earlier is that it is incredibly content dependent, and the vast majority of the game's content you are unable to play this into. Because of course it requires that enemies be freezable, and as we all know, bosses are not. Frozen will be triggered, but the auras will be removed and nothing will happen. However, if we actually get freezable endgame content, this team can actually get kind of good. Certainly not great. I mean, it still is a reaction spam team at the end of the day. But for the stupidest composition that you've ever seen in your life, it's a pretty good reaction spam team. You know it's a good reaction spam team if you have no idea what's going on screen. A little thing that you may have been noticing in my gameplay, oftentimes when an enemy was frozen, I would do a normal attack before I would E or Q and, you know, start doing my other stuff. Because if an enemy is frozen, I don't know how easy this will be to test. If you hit a frozen enemy with an infused Dori normal, it will trigger a superconduct instead of a shatter, which I really wish I knew exactly how they prioritize these sort of things, because it seems like they do it specifically to screw over the characters in the worst ways possible. Like for Dori, doing an infused normal triggers a superconduct instead of a shatter, but Yanfei's charge attack does the opposite and prioritizes triggering a shatter before triggering a melt. Come on guys, why do you have to be so mean? Yeah, this team is just a simple, you get hyperblooms, you get shatters, you're healing with Dori. Through the elements that it takes to trigger hyperbloom to freeze, you also passively get superconduct, which applies physical res shred and makes you deal more shatter damage. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, I don't know, some talent damage coming from Lama and Farina, mostly reaction damage. See, Lali isn't necessary here, and in fact, you might even have a better time with a C6 Rosaria, as she also shreds physical resistance, which helps with shatter damage. I'm using Sealali because her cryo application is comfortable, it follows the player around, and it comes with a nice shield. Dori is clunky enough, a shield helps a lot to take away some of the clunk. Although if you have Sealali C2, she probably still is best in slot, because this constellation is stupid. Anyways, that might be it. This feels like a short one, but to be fair, Dori doesn't have a ton of different stuff going for her. She pretty much just has this one specialized archetype, and she has a lot of cool stuff that she can do within it, but for the most part, if you want to be playing Dori at a high level, it is just Hyperbloom. Let's end off this video doing a quick little member read. Thank you to Najodo, Dorsalfin from twitch.tv/dorsalfin1, Rumpelitus, Dadiz, Penguin, Pegbee, Pyre's Flower, Do, Zach ZDR, Mudkip172, Star Nova, Beef Potato, Roberto Desu, Big Soup, Buffalo Milk, and Aqua. Thank you for your continued support. You ensure that this channel has a future. And thank you. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned something. Have a lovely day. I feel like doing something stupid.
I am Kirill Chudomirovich Flins. It is considered good etiquette to give my full name when greeting important guests. But this no doubt leaves you wondering what to call me on a day-to-day basis. Well, in the past, I was customarily addressed as Chudomirovich by most. But for simplicity's sake, you can just call me Flins. That's my surname.
I don't have the resources for this.